All right. Well, first, welcome to the first ever episode of the Luke Nielsen podcast. And I'm excited to be joined by one of my favorite people in the whole world, my brother Logan.
Hi, how are you?
So first, thanks, dude, for doing the first episode and for helping me out with all the podcast stuff.
Yeah, we just got done messing around with the mic setup for quite a while.
Yeah, I've got a real grip it and rip it mentality on pretty much everything. So I just dive into stuff that I have no idea what I'm doing, and I really do appreciate it because this would have taken a lot longer, would have sounded a lot worse, which I still got some sound things to figure out, but it would have been pretty terrible without Logan.
That's every first podcast never has the sound all completely figured out right away. So I think you're fine. You're joining everyone else who's ever done a podcast. So
well, that's good. Yeah, it's humble beginnings.
Yeah.
But you've done a lot of podcasting, which was really nice for me to kind of, learn some of the stuff. Just I've always listened to your podcast, and then kind of watching.
You're one of our fans. One of our three.
big fan. But we were talking about this a little bit earlier. Like, you always seem to have these really nice concepts and names and stuff for your podcast, and I'm just really I didn't have anything good. So the Luke Nielsen podcast is what it became because I figured that's my name. So
sometimes like the first podcast I did, I've done two podcasts with my friends Steve Wunderlich and Caleb Woodley, who are two of my best friends in the world, and we did we had a podcast where we had a great concept, but it ended up not being the right concept for us too. So I'm good at coming up with concepts, but it's not always the one I should be doing. We did this show called Advanced BS, which was it was a weekly show, but each month was its own topic. So we just covered whatever we talked about for that month. We just had to make work for 4 weeks. Some months was fun, and then sometimes we had a topic that we didn't really have a ton of interest in, that we would just run out of steam. So you would have just 2 episodes of three guys being like, "Yeah, we're still here," and it's that could have been better executed by maybe a different group of people. But and then we do one now that's playing Dungeons and Dragons because we're dorks, and but it's a really fun time. And then Luke did the art for us. He did the artwork.
Yeah,
for our iTunes photo and all that.
Well, that was really cool. I remember when you came to me with that idea and just sort of presenting it as this noir mystery detective type of thing, and that just sounded so cool to me. And you had played Dungeons and Dragons at sort of the end of
the
Advanced
other show.
BS.
Yeah, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons off mic. I've never. me and Steve, we've only played Dungeons and Dragons while recording it for some form of podcast. Yeah, we do this show called Gumshoes and Goblins where we played Dungeons and Dragons. It's a hard elevator pitch because we played Dungeons and Dragons, but me and him are playing detectives in this world, and each episode is its own case. So it's a role-playing mystery procedural comedy improv podcast. That all works better than you think it would.
It does. Yeah, I enjoy
it actually works
show.
Quite well, but it's when you tell it to somebody, you just see their eyes glaze over and cross, and they don't know what up is. Excuse me. That happens to their brain when you explain it to them. That's what happens. That's what they hear is what I just said. It was a bunch of gibberish.
It's just a bunch of vowel sounds and their eyes go crossed. And I guess while we're talking about it, I didn't mean to
start your show with pitching my show.
No.
Hey, if you like the 10 seconds of this show you heard, check out 2 other shows.
Let me send you in a better direction. That's usually the way I like to go. Apologies up front. You should maybe listen to this and say. That's mostly what this show is going to be, is me recommending other things I've liked. You ever heard of Star Wars?
Ooh,
it's pretty great.
It's neat.
Yeah. So, but just so, as we're talking about it, where can people find these things? Because I enjoy these podcasts.
They're on iTunes. You can, Advanced BS and Gumshoes and Goblins. They're on iTunes. They're both on SoundCloud. And just wherever if you have a podcast app on your phone, it shows up on that. I don't know how. I don't know what the magic is, but they get there. So if you have a podcast app, they're there.
Perfect.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I
Probably
really,
wherever you're getting this one, I'm sure you're getting it there too. So
there you go. Yeah. This will be on SoundCloud, and we'll figure out from there.
Yeah.
But anyway, related to that, talking about the podcast, something that we were kind of talking about before this is we have another brother. So I'm the oldest, and then you're
I'm the
3
middle.
years after me, and then Landon is our youngest brother. And sort of an interesting thing where all 3 of us grew up, same parents, in rural Iowa, and took these very 3 sort of divergent paths. We live in 3 different states.
Yep.
Very, very different sort of career paths.
Yeah.
Where, you've done a lot of stand-up comedy and
Yeah,
podcasting and went to film school and all these sorts
Yeah.
of things.
Yeah.
Our youngest brother is a wildland firefighter.
And just wants to generally be in the woods.
Yes.
No matter what he's doing, he'd
Yeah.
rather be away from people and amongst the trees.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And then I went, I guess you'd call a more traditional route, at least from where we're from,
Yeah.
is a teacher, and I teach at the high school we graduated from,
Yeah.
and those sorts of things. So what kind of led you to, or even as a kid, what was sort of the inspiration to, like, this is something I think I want to do, or even I can do, because we don't see a lot of that in our area?
Well, for the longest time, I didn't think I could do it because it didn't. I had no idea how you became a comedian. There was never, because this was now young kids coming up. There is podcasts. You can find a billion sources on how to get your start in comedy. Every podcast hosted by a comedian talks about how they get started, going to mics and, trying to get your face seen at clubs, so like that. There was nothing like that ever when we were kids. It was just something I always wanted to do. I don't have them, but I remember like making drawings in 2nd grade of, what do you want to, everyone's drawing what they want to be when they grow up. And it's, and some are fantastical stuff of baseball player and whatever, but it was all kind of regular jobs. And then my drawings were always of me holding a microphone.
Yeah,
it was always me on stage. I just always wanted to be it. Once I learned what comedians were, I could never get the word right, so I would accidentally tell people I wanted to be a custodian because I would mix up the words. And not that there's anything wrong.
Way to go.
Nothing wrong with being a custodian. That's just not what I meant when I would say it. I meant comedian, but everyone thought I was dreaming of becoming a janitor.
With mic in hand.
Yeah,
So you play into the crowd.
Yeah, just a real dreamer in empty hallways. But I don't know. I just always wanted to do it. It was just always my dream ever since I was a kid. And then I didn't do it. When I got out of high school, I did it for the very first time I did it was at a sketch show that we did. My senior year of high school was the first time I ever did stand-up. Most of it was just lame jokes, and I ended with just ripping off Pablo Francisco's bit "Little Tortilla Boy." It was just my version of it, but it was essentially the exact same thing. And that's how you start. Everyone starts by just stealing something.
I remember that set actually.
Just rip it. And I had a couple of jokes that had nothing to do with that too. I just started. Here's I don't know. I found that funny. I can do those voices too. The movie theater voice and stuff.
Yeah.
So I just started by ripping that off, and then just didn't do it did it a couple years later in a stand-up competition in Cedar Rapids, just one more time. Then lived in Chicago for 3 years, never did it. Did improv and stuff, but never did stand-up. Never even really thought about it. Like, even though there's such a comedy scene there, and that's where I live now. It's always been a really vibrant comedy scene. I just never even thought about it. I really thought I couldn't do it, and I tried writing stand-up, and I would try to write jokes, and I just hated what I wrote. I just didn't have it, I guess, is just how I felt. And so I just never did it. And then a couple years later, I got divorced, and the morning after we had a conversation one night of like, I think we're gonna get a divorce. The next morning, I woke up and I called a couple friends just to get it all out and whatever, and then I just started writing jokes. I got on my computer and I typed 5 pages, 12-point font, single-spaced, of jokes about divorce. And like I hadn't really thought much about it. And then I just got done. I'm just like, oh, I should actually try stand-up for real.
Yeah.
And that was 6-7 years ago now. And I just started going up. I was living back in St. Ansgar, our hometown, St. Ansgar, Iowa. And then I drove up to Rochester. There's a comedy club called Goonies. Went up there. Within 6 months, I was on the road working. I don't know. That was, by that point I had heard, I'd listened to podcasts and, read stuff on comedy, and learned that you just had to go to open mics and you just had to start. You just had to start and bomb and just eat it and just suck. And if you were okay with sucking, you would just get better. And, you know, and that's just kind of what I did. And,
Well, so you hit on a few things there.
Yeah, a lot. I threw a lot at you.
That's good. It's like a Kevin Smith interview. I just ask a question and then you take care of the next hour. But you hit on a few things there that I think are really interesting. One being, so you moved to Chicago, you were at 20? 19, 20 probably.
When I first moved to Chicago, I would have just turned 20.
Yeah,
because I turned 21 in my first year there.
And we came out for that. That was fun. But I remember thinking, I've always been fairly comfortable speaking in front of people.
Yeah,
and that's always, people bring that up as the number one fear, over death is public speaking, those sorts of things. But I thought to me, it just seemed insane to move away to Chicago, which from where we're from, seems even bigger than it is. It's just this, huge metropolis, whatever. And it seemed crazy to me. Like at 20 years old, like I'm just gonna go.
And that was I was going there to go to film school too. And there's no film industry in Chicago either. So that was even before I even thought about doing stand-up, which actually exists in Chicago. I was just going to film school because I liked the school there.
Sure. So, what, I guess, is it just a part of that motivation of feeling like this is really something I have to do that gets somebody from small town Iowa to be like, I'm just going to take this leap? It's something that I don't really know.
For me, like creative stuff like that, nothing else has ever made sense to me. Mm-hmm. And especially not to drop another detail in there, but at the end of high school, I had no intention of following, my junior year of high school. I was planning on, the thing I was leaning towards the most was becoming a radiologist. Mm-hmm. And was doing that. I'd never thought about pursuing, because I was always in theater and had done improv and, loved all that stuff and loved doing it in my free time. I was always writing, just always, and drawing cartoons and whatever. I'm not a good drawer, but I was always, ever since I was a kid, there was notebooks just full of little cartoons and stuff. But I never thought about pursuing it. And then my junior year, I sustained a really serious head injury. Mm-hmm. That gave me a severe concussion and then actually kind of weirdly wiped out math memory, which it sounds really weird, but I was in algebra 3, I was doing fine, I was doing pretty good in the math department. After the head injury, I came back and I remember there was a test that week and I sat down and I looked at the equations and I knew them. But I couldn't figure them out.
Yeah.
I was just staring at them being like, I've done these. Mm-hmm. And I can't even fathom how to begin them right now. And it really, to become a radiologist, you don't have to be a mathematician or anything, but you have to do chemistry, you have to do science and some math. You have to do okay in those fields. Yeah. And I went from, and I wasn't an amazing math student, but I was getting, A-, B+ in math. Mm-hmm. I was doing pretty good. And then I was in failing. I was getting the first Fs I'd ever gotten in high school. Suddenly I just couldn't do math. And I barely got out of algebra with a D+. Was able to just eke my way out of there.
Yeah.
I had to take an incomplete on chemistry. The teacher was nice enough to give me a deal that she would give me an incomplete if then the next year I would take advanced bio, which was less numbery and stuff. And it messed me up for a while. I couldn't it was after doing some tests too, I found out that I had the math fluency of a 5th grader.
Yeah.
And they showed all my other stuff. You go in for these tests and you do writing, you do reading, all stuff. Everything else, my writing and my reading was at my level. My writing was at college level. Everything was fine. But then there was just this huge dip in it, and it was my math. It was my math fluency, and that stuck with me for a long time. I remember my junior prom. it was a casino theme.
Yeah.
And I remember playing blackjack, and that's just, you're adding up to 21.
Yeah, that's the goal.
And I would get the cards, and I would like stall and kind of pretend like I was bluffing, because it was hard for me to add like 7 and 6 quickly.
Really? Yeah.
It really messed me up, and that's something that I trained myself. Now I'm actually faster than most people I know at doing simple math like that, because I pushed myself so hard to just get good at quick math again.
Yeah.
But I, like, at the time, it took me years. It messed me up for quite some time. But so, very, very long way to answer your question.
That's all right.
No, but so that happened to me, and then it was suddenly like, well, crap, the plan I had, I can't really do now.
Yeah.
Or at least I didn't know how to do it. And at that point too, with a head injury, that was then I started having pretty severe depression too. You know, so, and when you are dealing with really severe depression, things just seem impossible and you know, confusing. And it's like, and I was angry all the time, which I'd never been an angry kid ever, you know. And so I was just angry and confused and mad. And so the more I thought about it, the more I toyed once before, I think, with going to film school. And then the more I thought about it, was just like, you know what? You can, I don't know, it was just kind of like, it was kind of like a near-death experience, because it was. I mean, I could have died when I had it, when the head injury, but it was just like, you know, I should just chase things that I want to do, because tomorrow my brain could be wiped clean.
Yeah.
And so that's what made me decide to go to film school. I didn't know if I even really wanted to work in the film industry, but that was my passion at the time. I was really into movies, really into screenwriting. I was always trying to write screenplays. I didn't really know how, but I was just, you know, I would look at screenplays online and then just try to emulate, you know, the structure of them, how they looked.
Yeah.
And I tried to learn about story structure and stuff like that, and just tried to, I don't know, I was just always doing it, and I was just kind of like, well, I should just go and see what that world is like. And that's what took me there. So it wasn't even necessarily that, like, I have such a dream to become the greatest film director of all. It was just, you know, why not go after a thing that you are even mildly interested in, because, you know, half your brain could quit working tomorrow, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I am appreciative of that. And I think, you know, touched on a couple of things that I wanted to get to eventually. One being, you know, I think it's interesting where you and I have had conversations. We've had dissimilar experiences, but that maybe create a similar reaction or something, in terms of, you know, we were both married very young.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, something that I think also we're kind of exposed to, where we grew up in sort of the rural Midwestern is.
Well, that's the plan.
Yeah,
that's the plan.
yeah.
You get out of school, you find your lady, you get your job, and then you quit. That's kind of all people tell you to set up your life, is just, it's find your career, find your partner.
Yeah.
You know,
which, you know, I don't think is an
there's
entirely
nothing against it. I
bad
have nothing
thing.
against it. People who want that, and that's what they do, and like they're happy doing it. Oh man, that looks great.
Yeah.
Like,
and which, I mean, very similar. You wound up marrying high school sweetheart. I wound up someone I met in college right away.
Right. Both went great.
Well, yeah, both we were both divorced.
Yeah.
Which, you know, that I don't want this to be anything that denigrates anyone else or speaks bad of that, but I think is an interesting thing that you hit on, in terms of where does that going through a challenge then sort of lead to. I mean, you talked a little bit about, you know, that feeling of, hey, this could all be gone, this could all be wiped away. But do you think, as like a creative individual, there's sort of a need for that coming out of something difficult, that like this is like the only sensible outlet for those feelings or those sorts of things?
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I literally, once I got divorced and had something real to talk about, I suddenly felt like I could do comedy. Mm-hmm. I suddenly, like, you know, so that's jumping ahead a little bit to that, but like that was what, I don't know, it was this feeling like I had a perspective on the world. I had something to talk about. And before, when I tried it, I knew what stand-up looked like. I knew what it sounded like. I knew how jokes worked. But I didn't really have anything to say. Mm-hmm. And if I had kept going on stage, I would have found that. You find that the more you do it, because everyone who starts doesn't have anything to say. Like, there's very few kids who go up there, first few times, and it's like, oh, they already know what they want to be.
Yeah.
There's very few. I've probably, in my career, I've probably only met one person who I saw them go up young and like, oh, he already knows what he wants to be.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's years of throwing different personalities at the wall and trying to, what do I even want to be? And then you eventually, and it might take you, I'm still figuring it out. I'm 7 years in. I'm still figuring out or 6 years. I'm 6 years in. I'm still trying to figure out what my voice is, what I really want to be talking about, whether I want to keep doing it to tease further ahead.
Yeah.
But so it's part of it like that. Yeah. And with the head injury stuff, going into film, to me, that wasn't so much that I needed that I need something like that to be creative. It was just that made me appreciate being creative so much more, that I could take this huge hit, and then it made me suffer with depression for the remainder of my life. In sometimes big extremes, sometimes it's not quite there, but like it made me appreciate the thing that didn't get rocked out of my brain, and be okay leaning into that more and saying, yeah, I know following this isn't necessarily the safe bet, and it's not necessarily a healthy path to go down all the time.
Yeah.
But it's a thing I have, and I don't want to cast it aside just because it's a scary thing to fall into.
Yeah.
Yeah, and on the topic of my divorce too, is like that's, yeah, I didn't go on stage like talking like smack about her. I just talked about my experience of being a young guy, like being 25 but already feeling like an old divorced man. Like that's what I go, because I would never, and especially now too, like it's been years since it happened. I'm not the same person I was then. I hope to God she's not. We got married young. You get stunted when you get in that type of a relationship. We got engaged at 20. Then we pretty much stayed 20. Life got harder. And more stuff got thrown at us, and we kind of were still just trying to be young lovers. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's like and then our lives went completely different paths, and that's what brought the divorce on, was being like, oh, we don't want the same stuff in life at all.
Yeah. You know. I mean, I totally understand that and relate to that, and I think you nailed a couple of things there. One, if you're someone who likes to do creative things or whatever, it's important to get that depth of perception.
Oh, yeah.
And, I mean, good or bad, it comes from trials and things like that. So I try to tell my students things like, the most interesting people are people who've gone through things, because you have this ability to see things differently because you've been through some things. You get a little distance from them.
Yeah, this is a movie no one has seen. I saw it once before, and I just happened to catch the end of it this morning. But it's a movie called The Big Kahuna.
Okay, yeah.
It stars Danny DeVito, Kevin Spacey, and Peter Facinelli. They're three salesmen, and it's just them in a hotel. It's a real small movie. It came out in like '99, but no one really saw it. But I just happened to catch it this morning, and Danny DeVito says a thing to Peter Facinelli's character. He says, you don't this, and Peter Facinelli's character is like religious and really devout and like a nice guy. But Danny DeVito says, he's like, you have no character yet. And he's like, you don't have character until you have something you regret.
Oh, yeah.
That you can look back on. He's like, not saying you didn't. And he's like, Peter Facinelli's like, oh, because I don't have anything I regret. He's like, no, you already have stuff you regret. You just don't know it yet. And until you can look back on it and say, God, I wish I could change that, but knowing you can't, and you just have to throw it on your shoulder and keep going through life, that's when you get character. And like watching it this morning was just like, yeah, that's true. And that's, some of the stuff I've been dealing with is just like stuff that I don't forgive myself for, and then I beat myself up for, and then I regret, and I wish I could change, and got hung up on the wishing I could change it for so long, but then you don't move forward at all.
Yeah.
And, and that's, I'm jumping all over, but
no, that's good. Just another little plug for The Big Kahuna and Danny DeVito. I told you, we're just going to plug stuff here that we find amusing.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe as good a time as any to sort of transition into.
Yeah, why not?
We've kind of danced around some of the depression and things like that. And that's something I want to talk about. largely because you and I have had discussions about it.
Right.
And I think it's very interesting. I see it. I don't mean interesting to sound like it's a positive thing, but
Right.
I see it a lot with my students who I teach and things like that, and just mental health in general. And we've talked about, you get these sort of, there's some TED Talks and different things like that are great, people talking about their mental illness. And I think that's great. It's more in the open than it once was.
Right.
But there's a lot of this of like, oh, I went through this. Here I am on the other side of it.
Here's what I learned from it. Here's what blah, blah. But, sorry, just the table. But it's always that, but it's never... You never really get to, and then they'll tell you like, yeah, it sucked then. I couldn't get out of bed. I wanted to quit. Maybe I was suicidal. Maybe even I attempted. Like they'll say that stuff, and then they'll kind of get like, oh, here's what I learned from it, and then, but it's like, yeah, but when you were in it, you didn't know what you were gonna learn from it. You didn't know how you were gonna get out of it. You just had to deal with it.
Yeah.
And no one ever really talks about it as they're going through it, because when you're going through it, you try to hide it. You know. And yeah, one of the reasons, like that's one of the main topics we're talking about, is in the last year, looking back, it's been the last couple of years, but primarily the last year, I had a nervous breakdown. I've just had a lot of stuff happen in my life. I had my career started taking kind of a nosedive, was already financially pretty hurt from my dog having a bunch of surgeries, and I love my dog to death. And then last year I had a really bad breakup. I was with a woman I was going to marry, and we split up very suddenly. I don't know, it just happened very quickly, and kind of gave me whiplash from it, and just really brought out all of my depression, all of my anxiety, and really just that's kind of consumed me for the last year of my life. And I don't know, ask me something today.
No, that's good. And that's kind of the point we're getting to that I think is important, is there's not a lot of voice out there for people who are struggling with this from someone who is like, oh, I'm also in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And that's something that, you and I talked about, and it's difficult, obviously difficult from your perspective, but difficult to be like, well, how much do you want to talk about this? Or, how much is a person capable of talking about these things in a way where they feel emotionally okay, intellectually okay, and those sorts of things.
Right.
And this kind of stemmed from us having a lot of conversations where I'm like, wow, the way you describe it helps me make some sense of it, helps me understand. I just think that's such a powerful thing. So I guess maybe starting there, you talk about, depression, anxiety, and, don't need to get any deeper than what you feel comfortable with, but, what are some of those feelings? I mean, what are you feeling in a moment where you're feeling exceptionally anxious or something like that?
Well, I mean, like depression I'm used to. Depression I can handle. I don't know, you can feel that. Anxiety is so consuming. It's so hard to describe, and the best way I've found to describe it, like there was a period where for several months where I was having daily panic attacks, just these full-on meltdowns where I would start with like hyperventilating and then just turn into just crying. And it would happen. I would be at work, and anytime I was away from somebody, I'd be having a meltdown. I started planning them into my day. Like I started to be away from people.
Not funny, but
no, but we've talked about this a ton. But
yeah.
I would start playing and just like, okay, like I was a dog walker, when they first started happening. I was walking dogs as a day job, and I was just like, okay, so I will have an extra 10 minutes once I get there, because it only takes 5 minutes to get there. I need to start this walk at this time. And that gives me 10 minutes to sit in my car and just lose my mind and just freak out and just cry and just not be able to breathe. And the best way, like in my head, it's not an actual noise, but like the best I can describe it is just it gets loud. It's just like But I mean, there's no noise. I'm not hearing noises, but it's just like I just need to like close my eyes and just like hold my head. It's like if you're at a pier and like a boat lets off a big foghorn, like brrr, where it's like no other sound can exist at that time.
Yeah.
Like you just have to wait for it to be over before you can continue your life. Like that's just like how it feels.
Yeah.
And just I don't know. I get like now I'm not I don't have that anymore, but I have just kind of residual anxiety, and like I just feel it in my body. I just get shaky. I just I get manic. I just kind of I kind of just pace around my apartment, not knowing what to do. Even if it's just something like, hey, I just need a glass of water. Like I'll walk around just not really knowing how to get a glass of water. Like it's just it's that palpable and that consuming, and that's where I talk about these things feel impossible.
Yeah.
It feels impossible to just do anything in your day to solve any problem, even if it's just I need to go to the grocery store and get 5 things that I know what they are. I get them all the time. It's just like, nope, I just cannot do it today.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what the anxiety feels like. And then once that gets really bad, then I get really self-critical and really beat myself up for just like you're worthless because you can't get these just simple tasks done. This is what people do every single day. People have harder lives than you. What is wrong with you? Then that's where I get depressed, and then I just totally crumble, and then it's hours that I don't move.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so one is kind of really feeding into the other.
Yeah, that's why this like last year has been particular, because I've had depressive states before. I had some really bad depression like right after I graduated college, and then I got married right after that. And it was just a lot of like life changes bring it on. So I had and that's not what like caused the divorce. We were married for a couple of years after that, but it was like that was a really horrific, rough patch for us.
Yep.
And like was suicidal and stuff, and and I can't imagine the stress that put on her. We got married on a Saturday, she started student teaching on a Monday.
Yeah.
No honeymoon. Then it's like, oh, now I got to come home every day wondering, is my new husband dead? Like I couldn't imagine. So before I used to be angry at her because I'm like, she was real mad at me some days. I'm like, oh no, I'm surprised she kept it together at all. So I've had depressive states. Those are kind of easier to come out of because I can beat those with distraction. I can beat those with things I care about, things I want to do. Like with that, like after, I had a really bad depressive state, we actually moved back to St. Ansgar, and that really helped. It just got me away from just change of scenery. Even though I didn't really want to move back here, it really helped to just get out of Chicago, reset, rethink things, live a simpler life for just a little bit, because just life is a little crazier in Chicago. Things are just way more expensive.
Yeah.
It's just harder to get by. And like stuff like that can help. But the anxiety though, like I've really yet to find a way to really curb that. I'm getting a little bit better, but that's much harder to control. It's hard to distract yourself from anxiety because the distractions add to it.
Yeah.
If I try to like pivot and like, well, I'm going to do this instead, and it's like, well, you really should be finishing the first thing you started, and then it just compounds on top of everything. So, and then that feeds into the depression.
Well, then, we've talked about before,
and I'm
too.
speaking pretty manically right now because I'm anxious about talking about it, but I want to, so that's why I'm speaking very quickly.
No, and that's good. And you hit on something we've discussed before too, where just having conversations with you, conversations with students and things like that who are struggling with anxiety or other sort of mental health things. There is this strange sort of convergence of intellectually, I understand that what I'm doing right now is not in my best interest, or I'm understanding that like this task maybe shouldn't be difficult or whatever.
Yeah.
But then there's this other thing that's undercutting it. So, I mean, I don't know if you have anything to say on that, or, how do you try to make that distinction, or does it become difficult, or sometimes maybe is your intellectual side feeding into the anxiety because you're overthinking it?
I feel like it does lead, and I'm not saying like I'm intellectual as in like I'm a very, very smart person or anything, but when we say intellectually, it's just like where it's not just the disorder, where it's your, that like this isn't you and these things aren't hard to do. It feeds into it, and part of it too is my imagination, because I am I'm very creative. I've built my whole life on trying to be creative, so I can imagine every single worst case possibility that can happen. Mm-hmm. So I imagine if I do this, or if I don't do this, or if I don't get this thing solved, I do this instead, or if I blah 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 blah. I have 20 worst case scenarios lined up ready to give me a panic attack.
Yeah.
And I had something else to say and I kind of forgot, but it's I don't know. It's just I just can't really, like, the anxiety, I just feel I can't control at all. The depression, I feel like I can control. The anxiety, I just feel like I can't steer. I am just in the passenger seat and just kind of waiting to see where the crash is. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if the intellectual side of it, I don't know if it necessarily feeds into it. I do wish a lot of times I could just feel the emotions instead of the thoughts so much.
Sure.
I really wish I could just spiral and just be sad. I try to fight it so much by thinking of, why, like, I try to fight it intellectually and try like, well, maybe if I do this instead, it could be this, or if I do, I need to blah, 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 I need to do that. And I'll try to fight it with my mind, when I do wish sometimes I could just sit down and just be like, I'm very sad right now and I'm upset and I'm scared.
Yeah.
It took me so long to just be able to say I'm scared. I'm worried, and even not even classifying what it was, but just the hardest thing to say with dealing with all this, because it took me so long to tell you about any of it.
Yeah.
The hardest sentence to say when I was dealing with the daily panic attacks and the meltdowns and everything was the sentence, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
That was the hardest thing to even admit to myself, that I'm not okay. And I think if I'd done that a little bit earlier, it wouldn't have gotten worse. If I'd been able to just accept that I needed help, I needed changes, I needed to speak to people about it, because I held it down for so long, just months by myself.
Yeah.
And just kept trying to think, well, if I just keep going to work, if I just keep doing what I'm doing, it'll be fine. I'll prove to everybody that I'm fine. My ex who broke my heart, I'll prove to her that no, I'm gonna make the best of this. You'll see, when really, like. And I don't blame her for the meltdown stuff. It was just the last thing. It was the final shove into mental breakdown territory.
Sure.
I look back on it, I'd been building to it for a year and a half before that. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember my original point, because I am all over the place right now.
No, that's great.
And this is where I get frustrated too, because I'm actually, when I speak, especially in my comedy, I try hard to stay very focused and on the details.
Yeah.
I like beginning, middle, and end. And this is where this stuff gets so frustrating to me, because I don't feel like myself, even talking about it. I feel more frazzled. I feel more confused, more mixed up. I lose my train of thought a little bit more, which is something I've trained myself to not do, and I really try not to do ever in my comedy and in my writing.
Yeah.
I never want to lose the thesis.
Yeah.
This stuff, when I get into it, I kind of just get lost, and I get turned around and just. Yeah.
No, yeah, and I absolutely understand that. It's making my job pretty easy, though, for like a first time interviewing somebody. I'm knocking out of the park. I ask one question, I get 10 minutes.
I know. Well, then I give you 10 different topics you can choose from.
That's right.
So.
I'm jotting down notes on my legal pad. But I guess, talking about what we were talking about there. Now I got to try and remember the point that I wanted to bring up first with that. But I guess you talked about the difficulty of getting to that point of even saying like, okay, like there's something wrong here. I mean, that sort of thing. And I think just from, the young people I've interacted with and things like that in an educational setting, and really people in general, even if you're not dealing with a mental health thing or something like that, that seems to be, that's that sticking point of being self-reflective and being like, oh wait, there is a problem here. And I think that's an interesting thing, because I would say you're a very self-reflective person to a point that's damaging at some points.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But
it's also not always honest either, because I'm also not self-reflective about stuff I need to be self-reflective about.
Sure.
I'm self-reflective about things I really don't need to put on myself, but I do. It's taken me a year to admit some stuff to myself, like, that like the root of certain things, but I spend enough time bashing myself for 100 things that no one else sees.
Yeah.
That no one else knows, doesn't matter to anybody else. It's just my criticism of myself.
Sure.
But sorry for interrupting you there.
No, that's perfect. And that kind of answers what I was talking about. One thing I always bring up with my students is like the Stoic philosopher Seneca. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. And that's everyone, I think.
Absolutely.
And the way, I guess...
that's a quote I have written down somewhere, too.
Yeah, I love that. But, just through the conversations you and I have, and I mean this as a compliment, there's a part of me as an outsider that, when somebody you're close to, somebody you love is going through something like this, at least I, myself, you feel like a little bit of a failure, where I'm like, okay, like, I didn't know that my younger brother was feeling this bad, or, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And there is for that. I know mom and dad have had some of that too. And you've never made anyone feel like that or anything, but it is just sort of that, like, man, I kind of failed here in my responsibilities as the big brother, or, those sorts of things, but, in some ways I feel we're maybe closer now than we ever have been, just through some of these conversations that are, just real open and honest, that curious about getting to that point of feeling comfortable enough to say, okay, I think there's an issue here, or maybe it's not even comfort, but feeling that things have gotten bad enough, or how do you get to that point?
I mean, I'm still not comfortable, like, really with this. Is the most public I've been about talking about. I've talked about it on stage, but in smaller shows and stuff where I know it's only those 20 people who are going to hear it or whatever. I guess I've done some larger shows where I've talked about it a little bit, but I always kind of speak of it as if it's a thing I'm over, because I'm confident on stage. I keep it together on stage. So comfort, there's definitely never been comfort to it. I mean, what got to the point to where, I can't remember why I ended up telling you, because you were like the first person I talked to about it. I've talked to friends before about depression and stuff, because I've just dealt with it for a long time, and we're all comedians, so we're all bummed out all the time anyway. So it's easy to talk to comedian friends of just like, I'm feeling really depressed right now. And they're like, yeah, me too, right? So I've always been able to just like talk about some of that. I don't remember what actually made me finally just talk to you about it. Probably because I was just having those panic attacks, or you might have actually just happened to call me while I was having a meltdown. I think that's what it was. I think you just called me when I was in the middle of a pretty bad, like, just breakdown, like, so I just couldn't even pretend to be okay on the phone with you, because I was kind of shaky and crying, and it was what was on my mind. I'm like, I can't just do small talk right now, I can't.
Well, I'd called you. We've had a couple of those where I've called or something, and we just
You've kind of accidentally called at like times when I I kind of needed to to talk to somebody, because I isolate myself when I have them. When I have them, I shut myself off entirely from people. I do not talk to other people. I find every excuse to not go out. I flake on stuff when they were really bad. Which, like, I don't have advice I can give about this stuff, but the one little piece of advice, it's easier to say than to do, and I'm very guilty of not doing it, but is don't let it be your excuse. Don't let it be your reason for not doing things, for don't let it be a reason why you can just text somebody, I'm not coming, sorry, and leave them in the lurch. Like don't I let it be my excuse for most of this last year, and it left me feeling like I don't have as many friends as I used to, even just in that time,
Sure.
Anyway, that was a little side note. Yeah, I think, and then so I told you about it because I think you just happened to call me during an episode, and then, I mean, what made me finally just tell people is I had a breakdown at work, like during work. I just had a text from a client, and they just asked me, what's the latest? One of my dog walking clients, and for some reason, thinking about what the latest was just broke me. And so I just spent the next several hours just walking with just tears running down my face, not even crying, like just not being able to control my face. Like, and then I went to my boss and just told her, I just said, I need to leave, and finally just told her and just said, like, here's what's been going on with me for the past, by that point, 5 or 6 months.
Yeah.
And so for me, there wasn't a thing that was like, I'm finally going to talk to people about it. It was just like, oh, I can't hide it any longer. And luckily it came out that way instead of doing something I couldn't take back, because I absolutely was in a suicidal place. Like never, I don't like to say I attempted, because I never did, and that takes away from people who actually have attempted. But it was definitely, I definitely was making my plan. Of the how and the with what, and so I'm glad as much as it sucks to be, and I was walking around just shaking and just tears on my face. I almost collapsed at one point. My knees gave out and I almost fell. And so it was miserable and terrifying and stuff. I'm glad though that was the breaking point.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the last breaking point. I've stumbled several times since then, and each breakdown tends to get worse and worse. But I don't know. They kind of show me that, well, I have already proven I can get through it. That I can see the other side of this breakdown. They just get kind of deeper and longer. And so yeah, for me it was. And I always wanted to be able to say, I'm not okay. I need help. I just couldn't let myself. So, I wish I could say there was a moment that made me, that was a moment of realization that I could offer as some sort of inspiration or whatever. They're like, oh, once I knew this, then I was like, oh, that's when I need to tell somebody I'm no longer okay. But I just couldn't keep it together anymore. And I luckily had just started with a therapist at that point too. So I immediately had someone to talk to about it in Chicago too. And and I had just started with them like a week and a half before it. So like that just kind of was lucky timing, because but yeah, so I don't know. I there was no real moment, and again, longest answer to a simple question.
No, that's good.
I could have just said there wasn't.
Yeah. Well, this other thing, kind of talking about that is, I'm sort of fascinated with, or maybe fascinated is not the right word, but like this idea of during. I think there's so much information about so many trials and things of sort of a reflection of afterwards, where like, you and I have had conversations that, sometimes we talk about like 2017 was a pretty banner year in the Nielsen family. In terms of some of, your mental health things sort of came to a head. You went through a breakup. I got divorced. I'd been married for a long time, 2 kids, those sorts of things, which, has all been going okay. But the other thing we've talked about, I've had a series of health problems over the past 4.5 years now, sort of unexpected, sort of strange things. And the thing that I thought about, which, like I still continue to deal with some of those things, but, we've had the conversation of the toughest thing for me, or the thing I found most difficult, is when you're in the middle of it. And, there's that part of you that wants to be like, well, this is gonna be okay. But if you're in a situation where it's like, I don't really know that for sure. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if there's not a real clear, this is the fix, this is the answer, then it's like that becomes a much more daunting thing to me. It's like running a race with no end in sight. It's like, yeah, just start running and who knows, it might never end.
Yeah. Well, and that's especially, with the depression, anxiety, that's what I mean, for me at least, that's what pushes me to the thoughts of, do I even want to be around anymore? Because it just gets to, does this get better? Is this just what I deal with now? Because I don't want to. Yeah. If I have this palpable, all-consuming anxiety for the rest of my life, like, I don't want more life. I don't want to renew my subscription because it sucks. That's at least what pushes me there. And I've had enough moments of things getting better and being more sure of myself in certain ways that I do know that this is just a chapter. And that's the frustrating part too, is knowing that this is a very defining chapter in who I am. I know I'm going to come out of this knowing a lot about myself, probably for the better. But when you're in the middle of it, who cares?
Yeah.
Great. I want just give me the lesson and get me out. I don't want to be in it anymore. I get it. I needed to learn a lot about myself. Please just tell me what it is so I can just be done, and it and especially for me, like I'm so self-critical to a horrifying extent, and like, with you and your health problems, you've been dealing with it for 4 years now or something like that, and then other stuff happened after that, and like you've always been an inspiration to me of how you do just take hits and keep moving. But when I got to this point, then it turned into, this guy's dealing with more and got dealt another hand that he has to deal with, and he's still handling it better. And it just makes me go, why can't I handle anything I'm dealing with, And then especially I gave up on everything. So I really do feel like in the last year, my life fell apart completely. And it's my own fault. And that's the second part that makes me have a hard time moving forward at all, because it's always, well, you did it to yourself. This is your fault. It's early on in the breakup. I could blame my ex for, you put me in this situation. I could just be angry and stuff. And then once I reflect on it, I realize I'm like, well, no, a lot of why you broke up was because of your crappy behavior. was because, was of this stuff. And then it just kind of like, so the self-reflection is good, but you have to kind of tear yourself completely down into nothing before you can start putting pieces back together. And I feel like I've finally reached that point. Yeah. I kept thinking I'd reached that point and kept being like, oh, now I'm good, ready to start rebuilding my life again. And then another breakdown happened. Like, nope, I guess not. I guess I'm not. And that's now I'm at a point too where I don't even know what I want to be doing with myself anymore. I really, right now, I have no desire to really get back on stage and do stand-up. I know I love it, and the last shows I've done have gone well, and I feel good about them, but then right around the corner is another, bad episode. Yeah. And it's just kind of like, so I know I can't recommit myself to it till I have my mind right. Mm-hmm. Because if every time I do a show and it goes well, a plummet is waiting for me 2 days later, then it's like, well, that can't be my full-time job again, like it was. It can't be my life again, because then plummeting after every single show, then what, like, I ran out of steam again. I forgot I was good. No,
that's good.
I can't tell if I'm a great guest or the worst guest.
I think you're the best. You're answering like 3 questions ahead, You gotta.
Well, with this too, it's like it's tricky too, because for especially like the last 6 months, all I've done is like talk about this in therapy. I've done a lot of it with you, and I've started writing more about it, talking about it on stage too. So it's like this stuff really has been the focus of my life for, at least, the first, we're the 7 months into 2018, at least for all of that. Yeah. This has basically been all I've thought about. Sometimes bad, where it's just consuming me again. Sometimes good, of actually realizing stuff I want to change and want to do differently and stuff like that. But it's like, so I have a lot to say about it, because it's been my life, kind of. It's been my full-time job, is dealing with this, really.
No, and I think, that's great. Again, hit on several things that, I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And I think one thing, you're always very sort of complimentary toward me, which I think is probably undeserved. But, it's funny because I see it as the opposite way around, which we've talked about. I'm always so impressed and proud, and I think it's so courageous the way that you handle these things, because to me, it's sort of like, anytime I talk to somebody about like a student or something like that who's maybe going through not just a mental health issue, but an emotional issue, a difficult time at home, things like that, I always compare it to having the flu. And I'm like, if you've got the flu, if you've ever had a really bad flu, when you're in the middle of it, you're not thinking of anything other than, I don't want to feel this way anymore.
Yeah.
And whatever that may be. So if you're going through an emotionally challenging time, it's like that all the time. You're just always stuck in that zone of like, I got the flu, I just don't want to feel like this. I don't know what that means, but I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
And so, to me, like we've talked about, I've had a lot of similar feelings in terms of whether it's the physical health thing or whatever, of being in that moment of, and I can sincerely say I was never suicidal or anything like that, but having those moments of like, oh man, like if this is it, if this is the way I feel forever, I'm not so into this. But, like I can't imagine that having to deal with that, and then sort of my interpretation of having anxiety or something like that is like, you're taking these feelings that everyone has, but you're turning the dial up to 11.
Yes. Yeah.
Which to me, that's what I mean. Like, to me, that seems like such a daunting thing, where I go like, man, I don't know that I could handle that. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
from an outsider, it's like, man, that's pretty incredible to me to be that resilient, to like, well, just hammering through.
Well, I mean, I appreciate you saying that. It doesn't feel resilient, and especially because it's not just that you think like, oh, I don't want to keep feeling this way. Like for me, it turned into, I will never feel any different.
Yeah,
this is all I have from now on, and that's what's so scary about it, and what, just from my perspective, like what I think makes people then do really drastic things is just because you start dealing in certainties, you start dealing in in the extremes of always. You really use always. This is I will always, it's always and it's never. It will never get better. I will always feel this way. Things are so sure. You're so sure that the misery will never change.
Yeah.
And if you let that be in your head all day, every day, over and over and over again, I've been there. I understand why then people then think, well, then I'm not going to do it anymore. Yeah. It's scary, and it just kind of feels silly too, because it's your own brain, it's your own it's your own mind doing it to you. Like what purpose does this serve? Like
what evolutionary function is this serving?
Why would what benefit could I get from this? Like this wouldn't help me in the wild. This wouldn't. No wolf would live if it spent a year freaking out about what it's going to do with its life, and if anyone loved it, like it would just freeze to death. Like it doesn't. It wouldn't help you.
So I guess with that, as we talked about, I mean, you're still sort of in the midst of this. Have there, you've been talking to a therapist and things like that. Are there things that you have found that, certainly not like a cure-all or anything like that. Is there certain things you found that like, this has been helping a little, even if it's a small amount, this has been helping some?
I mean, for me, like as of this recording, like it was like a month ago, I had probably my worst episode yet, maybe a little bit more than a month ago.
Yeah.
But had my worst episode, and that really just that one shook me really hard because it took me I was shaky for a few days afterward. Like it took me a bit to feel operational, as a human. I guess for me after that, because then the first thing I did and just went and told my boss at work that, I'm like, I'm not going to try to ask for time off. I'm just kind of treating it like I'm leaving. If I can come back, great. I'm like, but I need to just go away. I needed to just completely shake up my routine, finances, whatever, be damned. I just had to, because who cares if I have a little extra money saved up if I'm broken, if I can't keep myself together, whatever, if I can't do any of that, who cares? And I don't know. So like I've been out of Chicago for a couple weeks now. So I don't know really what's gonna happen when I get back, but I told my boss that and gave a couple of weeks. It's like I had something to strive to for a couple of weeks of this break. I was finally giving myself permission to take a break. I kept waiting for someone to give me permission.
Yeah.
To take a break from stuff and go take care of myself. And I no one's going to give it to you. No one's going to be like, hey, you earned it, buddy. They're not going to do it. You have to do it for yourself. So I don't know, just for me, like, I did this trip. I drove out to the Grand Canyon with my dog, just kind of on a whim to go do it.
Yeah.
And it was really fun. And it, not just to see, I'd never been there before, and to see it. And it was awesome. It's just on my mind right now as I'm talking about it too. But it reminded me how much, because I walked around with my dog. And so then when you walk around with a dog at the Grand Canyon, everyone wants to talk to you and pet your dog.
Yeah.
And it actually reminded me how much I enjoyed connecting with people, because I had really forgotten that in the last few years. I became very bitter. I had developed really bad social anxiety. I just didn't want to talk to people, and especially after shows, like after a comedy show, like I didn't want to have to keep working. I didn't want to have to then, work the crowd and stuff, work the room, and like that's what you do in this industry. Be on and stuff. And especially if you have a bad show, I really don't want to talk to people. I want to leave.
Yeah.
And that started pouring over just into every aspect of my life. I just really hated meeting new people, to the point to where I stopped knowing how to have small talk. I really I've never been a guy who gets, obviously from this, I don't get shy. I don't get, really, word locked or whatever. But I really just became that. I would go to places, especially places that, like, if I'm going to a party and there's a lot of people there, I would really kind of hope no one would want to meet me. I just want to show up, do the, I'm here at your party, okay, goodbye. And I couldn't wait to leave places. And I forgot how nice it felt just to talk to people. I think it's because I wasn't a comedian. I didn't have to network with anybody. I didn't have to talk to people and be like, what are you going to give me? It's like, no, you're just a German person at the Grand Canyon. You're not going to help my career. I don't need to worry about that. Yeah. I can just talk to you. So again, very, very long answer to say, no, I don't have anything. But no, I guess just the one thing I could say is just give yourself permission to do something different, to,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's, for some reason, it's so tempting to just do the same thing over and over again. It's just, I guess there's a safety in the rhythm, even though it doesn't feel good. And it's still just scary, but it's like, at least something is constant,
Yep.
I don't know, but I guess just for me right now, it's not worrying about my career and all that stuff, and kind of just, I guess if I had an answer, if I had to actually answer your damn question, which I just haven't, because I blabbed about the Grand Canyon,
which sounds nice.
It was lovely. Everyone should go. I guess it's just actually focus on it.
Yeah.
Actually treat it like the issue it is. Don't just beat yourself up. It was when I actually just started thinking like, oh, I need to solve this to a point. You know, I need to get better with this before I can do anything else in my life.
Yeah.
Because this will just color everything, you know, because I started feeling better about my career and doing shows, and then this was still here, and I'd feel good about the shows, and it's like, okay, so that clearly will be waiting for me if I want it again.
Yeah.
But I need to just focus on this, and that's been a huge help for me,
Mm-hmm.
and has made me just feel a lot better, and that this is what I want to straighten out in my life first before any of the other goals or anything else, is just actually working on this and figuring out who I am and what I want and how I want to feel. I've never really thought about that before.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's good. You answered it. That was a good answer.
Took me a
that.
while,
Well,
but I got to
it's-
it. Do I just sound insane? I do just want to know. I feel insane. Do I just sound?
No.
Do I sound just completely crazy talking? I just.
No, I think it's good, and sincerely, it's making it easy on me. I kind of just wind you up and let you go. Well, and kind of getting to, this is sort of the last sort of main thing with that I wanted to talk about is, I think, you know, we've kind of gotten to a point where in a lot of ways it's good that mental health and these things have come to more of a forefront. It's more public, but I've seen doing stuff with you that the treatment, the resources available are just unbelievably bad or unbelievably,
Yes.
like just shortchanging mental health in general.
Yes.
Which very frustrating, obviously. But also just with people, pretty much everyone either, you know, has dealt with these things or has someone they care about who has gone through, you know, some sort of mental health thing or is going through. And that's always a difficult thing too, where I know people in our family, I know I've been guilty of either like, you know, how do I best try to help you, and going like doing it wrong both directions, either like, you know, like putting the kid gloves on and then I'm treating you as a disorder that's not a human being and being like, right, what if we do this, or, you know, what if
right,
we do this, or, you know, going the other way and be like, man, tough love, let's, you know, bust
right
through this. And obviously much more difficult to be struggling with the, you know, emotional difficulties of a mental health thing. But if you were to give any advice, I guess the conclusion I eventually came to is like, whoa, like I need to step back and just be a brother to my brother.
Right.
And just be here for whatever, you know, I can, you know, and those sorts of things, and try to separate myself from that. What would you give any advice to someone who, like, even just in your experience, like, yeah, this has been like a bad way to deal with it, or like, you know, or like, I don't appreciate it when people do this, or if it's the like, why don't you just be happy, or, you know,
well, I mean, that's
things.
the worst. If someone's just like, just cheer up, because it's not, as much as it, like, depression and stuff is like a sadness, like, and I'm not a doctor or a mental health professional, so I don't want to try to define it in certain terms, but like, it has nothing to do with happiness. It's not just the opposite of feeling happy, like, because I still have major moments of joy while hating myself so intensely and thinking I don't have the right to be on this planet. I can still laugh my ass off at something.
Yeah.
So it's not an absence of joy. That's not what it is. It's and I think it's just, I mean, we still don't really understand it fully, and everyone's different. Like, some people it is you know, imbalance. Some people it is brought on by severe trauma. You know, mine, it clearly came from my head injury. I never had it until that, so mine came from actual brain problems.
Yeah.
So like, since everyone's different, I mean, yeah, for me, it was just I didn't like feeling like a problem someone had to solve.
Yeah.
Like I really hated when somebody like, well, we have to get you fixed. Like that phrase would just make me hide because it made me feel broken. It made me feel like the burden I already thought I was.
Yeah.
So it's tricky because like, yeah, you need to you want to be hands-on a little, but you know, because you might have to step in if things get so bad, but you do have to, you kind of have to let the person show you a little bit.
Yeah.
You have to, you know, you really have to listen first, and you have to, if you're a person trying to help somebody dealing with it, you can't let your fear drive the situation.
Yeah.
You know, it's because it is scary for the people. This is why I never told anybody for a long time. That's why I was so terrified to tell you, and especially mom and dad. I just thought about telling mom and it making her sad and breaking her heart, and so it made me just not want to even bring that into her life.
Yeah.
Because I hated the idea of making my mom sad, you know?
Yeah.
And I knew she wouldn't understand it because she hasn't dealt with it, and not understand it in she's a very understanding person, you know, but just, it's something, if you haven't felt it, it's very hard to understand because it's hard to communicate. I don't know. I still don't know how to talk about it clearly, you know? In my long ass rambling answers. Just don't forget that they're the person you love. They're not just the problem. They're not just the thing. They're still that person. They're just dealing with something.
Yeah.
They're dealing with something real bad, you know. Someone gets cancer, you don't just go, well, just fix it then, dude.
Stop.
No, you sit with them, and even when they're having their bad days, you know that's not them. You know that's the trials of the illness and the whatever, and it's the same thing, you know. That's usually the analogy people make, you know. But it's you're not the disorder, and that's something too to make my answer longer. But two people dealing with it too is like, you know, it's very easy to convince yourself that it's all that you are.
Yeah.
I very much did that, and not to, you know, talk smack about anybody. Like I've seen people too in the entertainment industry, you know, the last year in the entertainment industry has forced out a lot of people who have done not great things to other people.
Yeah.
And I've seen that even at my level of just kind of nobody comedians, you know, that's happened. People from Chicago have gotten ostracized, and they've done not great things. And then suddenly they come back, and then all they want to do is they want to talk about mental health and be a proponent of mental health and stuff. And it's like, so they kind of make it their excuse as to why their behavior was whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And not that I'm saying that's what I did, but you know, I don't want to, like, I look back, like my ex, I dismissed her for like the last year we were together. I was just so dismissive. I just didn't want to talk about anything. I was jealous of the stuff she had going for her that was great and stuff. And for a while, I just told myself, well, it's because I was depressed and anxious. That was me.
Yeah,
that was me.
Yeah.
I did that. So it's like, don't let it be everything about you. Don't let it be your excuse. Don't let it, you know, I don't know. Just don't let it define you. Let it be a part of you, because it is a part of you.
Yeah.
And you need to deal with it, and you're gonna carry it for the rest of your life, because it doesn't just go away.
Yeah.
But if you try to make it your scapegoat or your excuse, I don't think you're actually going to learn anything from it. You're not actually going to learn how to deal with it. And I don't think you're actually going to learn what changes you need to make it easier to get through the day. And
Sure.
to make you feel better about yourself, and to feel, that's just something that's on my mind, because I've just seen a lot of people kind of now, since it is more of a thing being spoken about, I'm seeing it getting used as a scapegoat a lot. I'm just like, well, I was depressed, so it's okay that I was a dick. No, it wasn't. You were a dick.
Yeah.
But own that.
Sure. Yeah.
It contributed for sure.
Yeah.
But just, you were a dick. Okay, you don't want to be a dick anymore? Great. Let that be then part of your next chapter.
Yeah.
And then, to quote Danny DeVito from The Big Kahuna, the hit of 1999. But that's the regret you have to throw on your shoulder and march forward with. And it doesn't go away, and that's your character. And how you move on from it is who, that's how you prove who you are.
On that note, that feels like sort of ending on a little bit of a hopeful note. And we brought the Big Kahuna full circle, which is really what I was hoping to do with this. You asked me before this what my goal was with this, and really if I can get Big Kahuna out there to people, including myself, because I've never seen it.
It's not a great movie either. It's not.
We've found some wisdom here.
And speaking of people in the industry who've gotten forced out, it stars Kevin Spacey. It's not a classic by any means.
But I feel like we've given the props to Danny DeVito here.
Yes,
so, yeah.
And that moment is really great in the movie, and I saw it and I was like, oh wow, so go rent The Big Kahuna. I'm sure it's on
VHS,
preferably. Yeah. You want to watch that in pan and scan 4:3. That's what you. That's what I learned from film school with pan and scan and 4:3. That's
those applicable skills.
But well, thanks for having me on your show and.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. I sure appreciate it, and it was a lot of good stuff, and it was good, man. And it addressed a lot of the things that I'm curious about and that we've talked about, and I think that hopefully is of some value to somebody else and those sorts of things.
I hope so. It's we brought it up a couple times, but no one. I was, we talked about doing this, and I was nervous about doing it, but no one does talk about it while they're going through it, and not even saying the lesson, whatever I kind of accidentally ended with there to try to sound profound, because I don't think I have the right to give advice. I don't have advice. If I had advice, we wouldn't be having this conversation, but I hope, especially, if there is someone younger, whoever, and they're dealing with this for the first time, maybe whatever, if they, I don't know, it does help hearing about people going through it, and just, I don't know, makes you feel less alone, less broken, less like a failure, because that's what you tell yourself. So I hope at the very least someone can hear this and be like, well, I know it's not just me, so I'm not that weird.
Well, absolutely, and I think that's the best any of us can do, try and make that connection with people. So I appreciate it. Love you, man.
Love you too, buddy.
Thanks for being on, and I guess that wraps episode 1.
Episode 1.
Perfect.